Imaginary, when I was just 10, we moved to a new house in a different town. I was entering a new elementary school as a 5th grader, which is always tough starting out. It was a bit awkward as all the kids already knew each other, as I was just some random kid entering the scene. In my elementary school, you were made to sit with the kids from your class during lunch. And I remember it being really awkward the first few days at school. Kids are extremely judgmental around that age. And I was judged as the new kid, so it made making new friends 10-28 more difficult. But those initial days of being the new kid on the block, I actually met a few of the kids on the block. One of the kids was Dan, who went to a private school, so we went to different schools. We met while I was biking down the street, and he asked if I had just moved into the house on the corner. We started hanging out from there. Then a few days later, I met Alex. Alex actually rang the bell one day and asked my parents for me. I was confused when my parents called me to the door and introduced me to him. He said he lived down the block and wanted to know if I liked video games. Of course, I said yes, and he invited me over to his house to play Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. I didn't have that game, but I really wanted it, so I said yes. We walked to his house, which was literally the corner house at the opposite end of the block. Right away, I felt like the house looked less nice than every other house on the block. It was the same size as most, but it just looked run down and not taken care of. There was no grass. The front yard was 1131, just 2 big patches of dirt, with a walkway cutting through them to the front door. We entered the house, and it was equally disheveled inside. It was like a house of hoarders, boxes and junk everywhere in every room. He led us to the basement, which smelled like 15 cats lived down there. Weirdly enough, there didn't seem to be any pets. The basement was a Pidgey. It may have been the messiest room in the house. We sat on this brown leather couch, placed right in front of the TV. He had a GameCube and 2 pounds. He booted up San Andreas, and we played the 2-player mode, and it was actually fun. And in that moment, I thought I was going to like Alex and would want to be friends with him. Eventually, I wanted to go home, and so I said I got to go, and he seemed really disappointed, like he wanted to keep hanging out. We'd already been playing for like 2 hours though, so I just wanted to go home. He followed me halfway home until I said see you later, basically saying in a friendly way, all right, go away now. That was the first warning sign that Alex was a wacko. But I didn't find it concerning just yet. The next day, Alex rang the doorbell again and asked my parents if I could come play. This time we played GameCube in my room for about an hour. Not to sound mean or judgmental, but I was starting to not really like him just because I felt like he was weird, and he made me uncomfortable with how physically close he got to me. The next day after school, he rang the bell again. I wasn't really in the mood and told my mom to tell him I don't feel good, so he left. I would rather hang out with Dan, honestly, because I just liked him more. That same day, I rode my bike up to Dan's house to see if he could hang out. He was down, so we started riding our bikes further up the block, and this was a mistake, because as we passed Alex's house, he came outside onto his front stoop as if he were waiting by the window. It was weird, but it was also awkward because I just had my mom tell him that I was sick before. As we passed, I told Dan that I hung out with that kid and that I felt like he was slightly weird. Dan was shocked that I hung out with him, saying that whole family is crazy. I found out from Dan that Alex was actually a couple years older than me. He was 12. From this point, I decided to steer clear of him. The next weekend, Alex came to our door, again asking for me. I told my mom before this already to tell them I'm not home if he came back, so she did that. But late that night, I woke up to my window completely open and a cool breeze blowing into the room. It was a chilly September night, so I most definitely left the window closed. Originally, waking up to an unexpected breeze made me question who could have done that. Then I felt something poke my foot, and I screamed. I looked at the foot of my bed and saw Alex. He told me to be quiet, it's just him. Before I could even ask what he was doing in my room, he explained that his parents were fighting and he wanted to sleep with me. He climbed through my window. I was in shock. I told him to get out. He pleaded with me to let him sleep in bed with me again. I told him to get out. Watching him turn and climb out of my window was a disturbing scene. I closed the window and locked it, and then went straight to my parents to wake them up and tell them. They couldn't believe it. The next day, my parents both went down the block to talk to Alex's parents, and when they came back, they said it didn't go well. Alex's crazy mom screamed and laughed in my parents' faces, taking no accountability for her son's actions. I'm sure my parents didn't want to get police involved, because Alex was just a kid. But however, many nights later, I woke up to knocks at my window. I had my blinds closed, but I knew for a fact it was Alex. I didn't answer. The knocks went on and on for like 5 minutes. I even heard an attempt at opening the window. I was actually scared. I remember my heart racing. Eventually, of course, the knock stopped. I went to tell my parents, and they told me to just ignore it. I think they weren't as threatened, because like I said before, Alex was just a kid. It was probably a few days later when Dan and I, along with another kid I made friends with from school, were biking from my house down the block. And when we passed Alex's house, I saw him run to the window as we passed, and he just watched. I told my friends about what happened, and they found it hilarious. And my other friend made a comment about how he sounds like someone who would live in a gross house like that. That night, for the final time, I woke up to a sound in my room. It was the sound of my window being shattered. I screamed like a girl as I saw Alex climbing through the window. Through the closed blinds, I ran to my parents' room and woke them up. By this point, Alex was already back outside. My dad went outside and chased him all the way back to his house, with Al making it back inside his house. Before my dad could catch up to him, my dad pounded on the door until Alex's parents opened up. And my dad must have said something right, because he somehow managed to convince Alex's parents to pay for the window. If he didn't involve the police, they ended up paying whatever it cost to fix the window. And I never heard from Alex again, though I did see him once or twice in front of his house the next couple years while in the car passing his house. That family eventually ended up moving somewhere else, thankfully. I think there's a chance Alex was looking to do something crazy like murder me, or at the very least attack me, just because he saw me hanging with other kids when I didn't want to be his friend. I mean, what else would he do after shattering my window with something and climbing inside? I'm scared to wonder what kind of person Alex grew up to be.